Thank you very much. Good evening. If anyone can't hear me, just let me know. I'll try to speak loudly. A little bit of a cold, but I'll do my best. My name is Chris Stone. I serve as an Assistant District Counsel with the Metropolitan District in Hartford. With me tonight are several representatives of the MDC. Before I introduce them, I just want to acknowledge some people here this evening, dignitaries from the surrounding towns. I want to thank certainly the town manager of Farmington, Kathleen Egan, for making this facility available to us. Very thoughtful. Tom Callahan from the University of Connecticut is here. We have former State Rep Bill Wadsworth, First Selectman from New Hartford, Dan Jerem, sitting right in front here, Councilwoman Nancy Nickerson, and Mike D'Amico, the current State Representative from Farmington. As people come in and out, I may have forgotten somebody, I apologize, but certainly welcome to dignitaries, and just as important, welcome to all of you. With me tonight from the MDC is Scott Jellison, the Deputy CEO for Operations, Sue Negrelli, who's our Manager of Water Supply, Tim Anthony, Nick Salemi, Bob Moore, who's a former employee of the MDC, used to serve as a Deputy CEO. He had been with the MDC for 11 years, and before that he was with the Department of, then called the Department of Environmental Protection. From Graff & Associates, we have Kevin Graff and Liam Sweeney. First of all, tonight we're going to at least try to address some of the issues that have arisen over the past several weeks regarding the MDC option to provide water to the University of Connecticut. I think there's no question, based upon in speaking with people from the university, from the town of Mansfield, from the state, that there's a need for additional water supply, or arguably an alternative water supply, up at the university and for the town of Mansfield. In looking for that water supply, or searching for that water supply, several alternatives were presented. There's been an environmental impact evaluation that's been ongoing. You all know about a public hearing that was held in December of last year. There's a public hearing to be held next Tuesday as well, and then there's a closeout for comments at the end of January. The EIE was commenced over 2 years ago, in 2011, and it was to address an insufficient supply of water to that area of the state. The MDC was approached by one of the water companies that were interested in supplying water to UConn, for the MDC to provide water to that entity, who would in turn use that water to meet some of its obligations to UConn should they were chosen as the alternative. For a variety of reasons, no agreement was reached with that company, and we were approached in the summer of 2012 by the EIE consultants to offer an option to them for us to provide water, not through a third-party company, but to the university directly. It's from that the MDC staff, through the hard work of Mr. Jellison, Sue, Tim, and others, put together a response to that offer and created, and Sue will go into more detail, but set forth two options, or two alternatives for the MDC to provide water to the University of Connecticut and to the town of Mansfield. It's important to note that the MDC, while it owns and controls a significant, if not the most significant, surface water supply reservoir system in the state of Connecticut, we consider ourselves more as trustees, as custodians of what is in fact a state asset. It is a substantial asset. It's an obligation that we take seriously. We have been partners with groups in the Farmington River Valley since our inception in 1929, throughout the building of the two reservoirs, the Nepaug Reservoir in 1917, the Barkhamsted Reservoir in 1940. And we've been working with groups such as the Farmington River Watershed Association to make sure that the integrity of our water supply is maintained without any harmful or adverse impacts on what is recognized by certainly the people here this evening that care enough to come out, and also by the MDC, an area, the West Branch, part of the Wild and Scenic designation, as an invaluable asset to the area and, quite frankly, to the state of Connecticut and to the MDC. We submitted our proposal to the EAE. We participated in the hearing that was held in December. We received several comments after that time from many individuals, some of whom whose comments hit the mark, but I will tell you quite frankly that most of the comments did not. It's not because any malicious intent on anyone's part, but I think there was either misinformation or lack of information. To that extent, perhaps the MDC could have done a better job in rolling out their options. So we're a little behind the curve, but we do appreciate your willingness to come out and listen to us. We want to listen to you. To the extent that you have constructive comments that we need to address, or questions that we need to address, or that we need to address in the EIE response that we're preparing, to make sure that we alleviate any fear on behalf of the people that access the west branch of the Farmington River, alleviate any fear that this proposal, or our option to provide water to UConn, will have no impact on the west branch. That's what we're here to try to do. It's an ongoing dialogue. We've met with some individuals and some groups already. We've met with the Farmington River Water Association. We've made offers to meet with the Connecticut Rivers Alliance. We've met with Trout Unlimited. We've offered to meet with other hunting and fishing groups. Some have taken us up on our offer, and for that we appreciate it. Others have not. We understand they're not compelled to, but we do have a message that we want to deliver. You're not going to agree with us on everything, but hopefully we can, as we lay out the facts, there'll be open minds from our perspective and open minds from your perspective as we move forward. But again, the dialogue continues. This is a part of that. And for that, we have a presentation that's been prepared by the MDC. It's not that long. We're not going to fill the 2 hours here with just information from us. We really like to hear from you. But Sue is going to run the presentation and give a narrative about the history of the MDC. Not that long. Our stewardship, environmental stewardship of the West Branch, our water supply, how much water we have of it we use now, how much water we have available, and the fact that we've worked with other groups such as FRWA to make sure that the integrity of this state asset remains in place. So with that, Sue, if you can come forward.
Thank you, Chris. You incorrectly called me the manager of water supply and the manager of water treatment. And you know that Jimmy Randazzo, who's
That's
not
right.
here this evening, is the manager of water supply. Some of you may know Jim from the Barkhamsted office. He's home with the flu, so I'm lucky enough to be here though. So I've been with the MDC for 16 years, and I'm actually the author of the MDC's 2 approved DPH, Department of Public Health approved water supply plans. Again, we are here, there's some misconceptions, maybe misunderstandings about our option to provide water to UConn at stores. And, you know, we're here tonight to present you with the facts about our option and about our water supply sources. The MDC, you know, we could talk an hour about the history of the MDC and our water supply reservoirs, and I was told to keep this to about 15 slides, so we're going to go through this a little quickly. But the MDC was established in 1929 as a regional provider of water and sewer services. We serve about 400,000 people in our member towns of Bloomfield, East Hartford, Hartford, Rocky Hill, Newington, Wethersfield, West Hartford, and Windsor. Those towns are shown, all the colors are the same here. The member towns they sort of have the yellow or golden outline. Those are MDC member towns. We also serve a number of non-member communities, portions of the towns of Glastonbury, East Granby, South Windsor, Farmington. And an additional 5 communities benefit from having emergency interconnections with our distribution system. Berlin, New Britain, Manchester, South Windsor, and Windsor Locks. Other communities, we supplement their water supplies, such as in Connecticut Water Company's Unionville system and the town of Portland. Because we are a regional provider, in 1996, when the town of Portland approached the MDCs to supplement their supply, we were able to extend a water main from the end of our water main in Glastonbury to the Portland town line and assist them and supply them with the shortfall that they needed. So as a regional provider of water service, extending a pipeline to UConn from our existing service area is both viable and consistent with our past practice of supporting the region within our statutory limits, as shown here with the red line, which is the 20-mile radius from the state capitol. Okay, in the EIE, the MDC presented a couple of different routes to get the water out to UConn. The red line here from East Hartford, this is to UConn, is about a 20-mile run along I-84 and Route 195. The blue route along the bottom here is a 17-mile run along I-384 and Route 44. In the EIE, this was presented as the preferred alternative. Either route is comparable in scope to existing transmission mains constructed over the past 100 years in our water system, from our water supply reservoirs to our treatment plants. The location here in East Hartford, where we start, where the pipeline would be initiated, can only hydraulically support a transfer of up to a maximum of 5 million gallons per day. The water that we provide to the customers, all the customers that I mentioned earlier, comes from our existing reservoirs. The 9.5 billion gallon Nepaug reservoir and the 30.3 billion gallon Barkhamsted reservoir. The DPH approved safe yield of these active reservoirs is 77.1 million gallons per day. Safe yield means the maximum dependable quantity of water per unit of time which may flow continuously from a source of supply during a critical dry period without consideration of available water limitations. To develop safe yield, the MDC actually uses a more conservative method than DPH requires. As acknowledged in the EIE, our safe yield uses data from the 1960s drought, which was more severe than the DPH recommended 1 in 100 year drought. Using DPH's method to calculate safe yield, our safe yield of our existing reservoirs would increase to 83.9 million gallons per day. There are a number of factors that impact water supply planning. DPH, and I say DPH, I'm referring to the Department of Public Health, state, relies on a term called margin of safety, which is a unitless ratio of available water to demand. Available water takes into account the water service commitments a system has granted to outside entities or communities, regardless of whether the water is used or not. And as I mentioned earlier, the town of Portland is such a commitment to the MDC. All of these commitments require a diversion permit through Connecticut DEEP. In any of the options to supply UConn with water, all of them will require a diversion permit. With our current safe yield of 77.1 MGD and our 2012 actual demand from our system of 48.68 MGD, our current margin of safety is 43%. DPH recommends a minimum of 15%. And through the 50-year planning horizon, our margin of safety remains over 15%, and this is recognized in the EIE. And again, I'm just stressing this is from our existing water supply reservoirs, the Barkhamsted and Nepaug reservoirs. Another factor that MDC has taken into account is our agreement with the Farmington River Watershed Association. This association is charged with protecting, preserving, and restoring the Farmington River. As a steward of this river, when the town of Portland requested water from the MDC, and the diversion permitting process was underway, the FRWA intervened. Shortly thereafter, the town of Portland, the MDC, and the FRWA entered into an agreement that benefited all entities upon each party's recognition that there was a significant surplus of water in the Barkhamsted and Nepaug reservoirs available for drinking water use with no impact on the West Branch. Under the agreement, FRWA agreed not to oppose the MDC in any effort to sell this surplus water as long as a specified margin of safety was always held in reserve. Basically, we established trigger points in the agreement. In return, MDC agreed to pursue groundwater development as an alternative to future use of the West Branch of the Farmington. This investigation started immediately upon signing the agreement and continues to this day. And it is interesting to note that since entering into the agreement 15 years ago, MDC consumption has decreased nearly 10 million gallons per day. So it is evident that circumstances that existed in 1998 that necessitated this beneficial agreement are even more favorable today. And there is currently a surplus of 12.6 million gallons per day before the first trigger point is reached. And again, from our existing reservoirs, Barkhamsted and Nepaug. The Farmington River watershed, of which the MDC's reservoirs are contained within, accounts for 609 square miles. Can we go to the next one, please? Okay, this map, just wanted to point out here, this is our Barkhamsted Reservoir. All the property, the watershed, and the tan here is our property that we own. Nepaug Reservoir and the watershed, and West Branch, and this is the watershed up there. Obviously, you see the Farmington River here. The green pipeline, the green here are our pipelines which convey the water from our water supply reservoirs to our treatment facilities in West Hartford and Bloomfield. Here, the Barkhamsted Reservoir, this one right here, the watershed accounts for 54 square miles, and the Nepaug watershed is approximately 32 square miles of the total 609 square miles. Only 14% of the entire Farmington River watershed is controlled by MDC drinking water reservoirs, which would be used for supply to UConn. The West Branch Reservoir. The MDC also owns and operates the West Branch Reservoir, impounded by the Goodwin Dam, which was constructed in 1960. This reservoir is not hydraulically connected to any drinking water reservoirs, nor do any water supply projections show the MDC needing this reservoir for water supply purposes in the next 50 years. The watershed here for the West Branch accounts for, is approximately 120 square miles of the total 609 square miles. MDC works in conjunction with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Connecticut DEEP to manage the flows in the Farmington River. Under a series of state statutes, agreements, and riparian rights, the MDC releases water from the Goodwin Dam to the West Branch of the Farmington. Important to note is the wild and scenic designation of a section of the river in this area. The wild and scenic study performed for the upper Farmington River in the late 1980s and early 1990s recognized that there was sufficient water in the Farmington Basin for all uses, including recreation and public water supply. This analysis was performed at a time when the MDC water demand was as high as 66 million gallons per day, 16 million gallons per day higher than current demands. 50 cubic feet per second, or CFS, is the minimum that is always released to the West Branch of the Farmington. In fact, in 2012, which as you all know was a historically dry year, the Farmington River benefited from the MDC releases. Flows never fell below the statutory requirement of 50 CFS, even though the natural inflows to Colebrook River Lake dropped well below 50 CFS for almost 100 days during the year. All natural inflow of up to 150 CFS, as well as any flows released from Otis Reservoir, are released. Riparian releases to the Farmington River Power Company of up to 21.7 billion gallons per year are also made as requested and deemed appropriate. And Army Corps flood control releases are passed through as well. In conclusion, the MDC remains a steward of the environment and a partner in the management of the Farmington River. The releases that MDC makes to the Farmington River will not be affected, and none of the future water sales to UConn will affect these flows. All water would be from MDC's existing water supply reservoirs. The EIE recognizes this fact and the fact that MDC will continue to manage releases to the river as we always have. And now I think we're turning it over to questions.
Yeah, we're going to leave just leave the projector on. If anyone has a particular slide they want us to refer to during your questions, let us know. There's only 15 or so of them, so we'll be able to find it relatively quickly. I think in summary, what you might or I hope I recognize from this presentation is that our water supply that we would presently use, or that we would use to serve the university in the town of Mansfield, does not come, would not come, will not come from the west branch of the Farmington River. It comes from the east branch. It comes from our existing reservoir system. The watershed that feeds those reservoirs, the water that goes into those reservoirs by topography and geography, is not going anywhere else. It doesn't go to the west branch. It doesn't go out to Windsor, another part of the Farmington River. They feed into, and this is the intent, by the way, when these reservoirs were built, they feed into the Nepaug and Barkhamsted reservoir systems themselves. And then it's piped right to, through 3 transmission lines to our treatment facilities in West Hartford and Bloomfield. So, with that, I'm sure I hope there might be some questions or comments, and so we'll open it up to all of you. Yes, sir.
Are you saying, and you know, I don't really know everything, but I live on the Farmington River, and over the summer, as it was a drought, the Farmington River came down very, very low. As a matter of fact, there was a certain kind of, I don't want to call it scum, but some kind of green, whatever, algae or whatever that was growing. Does that have anything to do with your release or non-release of dams or non-dams or whatever?
I'll give you the short answer, then I'll ask Timothy to come up and give some details if you'd like. He's going to. It doesn't, one is not related to the other. The lower levels of the Farmington was in large part due to climatic changes. It was a hot summer, and we met all our obligations to release flows into that west branch from the Goodwin Dam, or the West Branch Reservoir.
Right.
We met those obligations. In fact, exceeded 50 CFS, excuse me, in our releases, in part in consideration for the water levels in that area of Farmington. We are limited in what we can release. We have an agreement between us, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection now. There are some competing interests amongst the 3 of us, those 3 entities, as to how much should be released and when. We spoke with Bill Case with Trotter Limited at length at the NBC, and he raised this as an issue. And we committed then, and we commit now, that if the other parties to that arrangement are willing and able, well, certainly they are, willing to sit down with us and talk about different flow triggers and amounts, then we'd be more than happy to participate and try to address problems like that. I would point out that before this reservoir was created, before these releases were made into the Farmington River, what you experienced, or what we all experienced in the Farmington River in 2012, I think that's what you're referring to, happened more frequently than they do now. That doesn't mean they should happen at all, but it was a more common occurrence I'm not saying every year, but certainly more common occurrence back before you have this water management system that we have now than you have today. But Tim, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Sure.
Why don't you come on up so people can hear you? This is Tim Anthony from the MDC, who knows a lot more about the reservoir system than I certainly do.
Thanks for having me all. Well, the 2012 drought really started in the winter of 2011. The significant lack of snowpack in the upper watershed is really what triggered the whole thing starting, as evidenced by flows going down to the point where we were actually reduced to minimum flow as early as April. There was a week period where we actually informed the DEP that we were going to be dropping to minimum flow based on inflows, and that's that 50 CFS number. And so at that point, they even decided to augment actually by a pretty significant amount. I think they added another 55 CFS to the river at that point out of their storage in Colebrook. So when these low flow periods occur, if we're going to talk long term about the summer, the New Boston gauge is the best. If you want to go look for yourself, the New Boston gauge is the barometer for inflow levels into the West Branch system. And as others have pointed out, for over 100 days, those levels were below 50 CFS, and for many of those days, and they were expressed to the DEP and others, they were actually historically low for the gauge, which has 98 years of record. So this was a really extraordinary event, and again, my opinion is that it really started with a lack of snowpack. A piece of evidence of that, Otis Reservoir didn't fill almost all summer. They were down significantly, and that's a really good indicator of how the upper watershed's doing, because they're rather conservative in their actions of how they draw down and they refill. So that was one of the first clues that that things were happening differently this year. During the period when we were at 50 CFS, we were working with the DEP all that time, managing the releases with their augmentation to meet the set point that they arrived at, which was 100 CFS, trying to maintain 100 CFS at the confluence of what was known as the Still, now is the Sandy Brook, all the way to Riverton. But at the confluence, Riverton and Robertsville gauges to meet 100 CFS and maintain that as long as we possibly could with the volumes that we had available. As summer was progressing, I don't have this on a slide, but this is a tracking mechanism that I use for Colebrook Reservoir, and I graph out various years, and I graph out an average elevation from 1992 to today. And we track that against our elevation. This kind of blue line that's shown is 2012. And as we got into July, we really start to look at things and get pretty serious about it, because now we're recognizing a 10-foot deficit in the supply, and the riparian releases to that date really weren't that excessive. So it was even more evidence. We were seeing inflows way low. We were seeing Colebrook Reservoir drop down significantly below average. And when we got down into July, we really started communicating with the DEP, expressing that things were not looking good, and that we were seriously considering suspension of the riparian releases. And the riparian releases are what all the users and population of the Farmington River down on the main stem, the riparian releases are really the big augmenter of flows through that period. Natural flow, when we do the daily calculations of inflows and then apply them and make a weekly outflow out of them to come from Goodwin Dam, natural flows can be 10, 20, 30 CFS. But on top of that, what you may not realize is that there's a riparian value a request that they've asked for us to send out of storage. We have an obligation to deliver that, and if we deem it appropriate, and so we try to make that obligation whenever possible. It's a significant financial obligation for us if we don't. So we have an interest, and we have an interest as the riparian agreement is written. The agreement that everybody signed into says that in the spirit of the operation of the river to benefit all the downstream communities that the river passes through, the authors of that agreement did a really, really fantastic job in designing how the river is run. My experience has been that it works pretty darn well, with the exception of things like 2012. But again, the real crux of 2012 was the historic low levels of inflows coming into the system.
Thanks, Terry.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
Were flows on the east branch similarly affected in 2012?
Okay, were flows on the east branch affected by the low snowpack in 2012?
To some degree. There was less releases from Lake McDonough made. If Barkhamsted spills, or the watershed that provides water into Lake McDonough below Barkhamsted Reservoir, if those aren't of any significance, then our modest releases from Lake McDonough into the main stem would be minimal. And there were, we manage a recreation pool at Lake McDonough. So you have a constant train of water coming in. We have to maintain a certain elevation for the beaches. And so any of the excess water that ends up in that pool, as we manage that 1 foot window, is released into the main stem. So that water only in the spring, or only when Barkhamsted is spilling, actually gets into Lake McDonough. Lake McDonough's elevation, after Barkhamsted starts to come down from summer demand, lack of inflows versus water supply, then Lake McDonough only has a little watershed from a stream called Bill's Brook, and then what comes out of Goose Green, out of Barkhamsted. And that water, as it comes in, because we were just holding a stage, is then released. We've tried to focus those on weekends for the benefit of recreation whenever possible, but they were pretty minimized this year.
And no effect on our water supply or ability to supply?
No, no. We don't use water from Barkhamsted Reservoir at all to feed into Lake McDonough, other than spill.
But my question was, in part, was the water coming into the Barkhamsted Reservoir diminished in the same sort of way that you say the West Branch was?
I'm sure it was. My job is really on the West Branch, so I don't have values for you for the East Branch. But Barkhamsted Reservoir, minimum elevation, I think it was only down 5 or 6 feet this year.
Right.
It didn't come down that far.
We never get below, typically we never get below, we've never gotten below 80% capacity at Barkhamsted. So we were not below 90% at Barkhamsted.
Yeah, there have been times, I'll give you just by example, to pick up on that 80%. At 80%, DPH and DP send out warnings that you experience, or they experience a drought. And if it goes down to 65%, I believe, it becomes a real, I won't say emergency, but a real difficult condition that needs to be addressed. In some of our surrounding towns, Manchester is the example I'll bring out. A couple years ago,
2008.
2008, worse, hotter summer than we experienced in 2012. The town of Manchester was getting very close to that 65% level in their reservoir. Their reservoirs aren't as large and can't sustain that kind of lack of inflow and the heat at the time. So they were very close. They had asked us to be on the ready to provide them some water through our emergency connection with the town of Manchester. It didn't happen, fortunately for them, and their reservoir capacity steadily increased in the balance of the summer. But they were very perilously close to that 65%. We've never, I think in my experience, I've been in MDC for a while, 90% is probably low, 88 to 90% is probably lowest, but we've got 30 some odd billion gallons of water in Barkhamsted, another 9.5 billion gallons in Nepaug. It's a very significant obviously a very significant water storage area, reservoir system that fortunately, to date and on into the future, as we project, will not be affected by these types of conditions. Bill?
At the beginning of the summer, the spring or whatever, at Barkhamsted and Nepaug, how close were you to capacity?
Summer
Or to
2012?
100% full,
Yeah.
how were you defined?
I don't remember what we
Yeah.
were this spring, but I mean.
Yeah,
like you
we
said,
did
you
spill at Barkhamsted and Nepaug, so.
If we
we're at
spilled, that's
capacity.
100%.
Full at
Yeah.
some point in the spring.
Correct. Yes.
Colebrook was short of what I would call full. We call full at Colebrook the benchmark of the Army Corps' flood control zone. Happens to be elevation 714.5. That's where ours and the DEP's allocations stop and flood control zone kicks in. So that's when the bowl is full as per the Army Corps. And that's where basically a water year starts from our viewpoint. Because you have spring coming, working through April and May, and then May 15th is when the riparian obligation starts to kick. And that is the mechanism that actually draws down Colebrook through the summer. And of course, Colebrook is the barometer of our main storage and our ability to either maintain minimum flow or continue to meet the riparian obligation. And we elected, as storage levels got way down and inflows just were not recovering, that's when we elected to cease riparian obligations, suspend them. We tapered them off a little bit, and then the picture just kept getting worse, so that's when we suspended the riparian obligations. We have a financial ramification to that, but in our stewardship of the river, we recognized that we need to keep 50 CFS going till next spring conceivably. And that actually is our measurement device, our calculation device, is can we maintain 50 CFS until next spring? And that's 32 million gallons a day, it's 50 CFS, and with when the DEP was managing their water, they came to the realization how fast it goes, and they were just releasing 10, 15, 20 CFS, not to belittle it because it was a big deal. It's a big deal for everybody when we get down to minimum flows.
Found a couple interesting things on your website and your strategic plan. One is that it's actually your plan, your hope to increase your service area, gain customers to help offset increased infrastructure, maintenance costs, etc. Another stated goal is to access water from the West Branch. Can you explain that?
Sure. The strategic plan was adopted in 2008. In 2008, and it's right in the plan, the projected water consumption rate was close to 60 million gallons per day. As you can see, our actual consumption in 2012, 4 years later, hasn't reached anywhere near that. In fact, it's 48 million gallons per day. Clearly, the projections were off. They were only projections. Through conservation efforts, many of which, or most all of which, are supported by the MDC. Water is a natural resource that needs to be preserved and conserved and protected. But through conservation efforts, downturn in the economy, places like Pratt & Whitney and East Hartford, where I live, went from consuming 10 million gallons a day of water to 3. There hasn't been and not solely because Pratt & Whitney has downside, but because they've become more efficient in their use of water. And at that level, conservation, perhaps in my house, may not have a significant impact, but conservation efforts at a place like Pratt & Whitney, with the amount of water they use, can have a significant downward effect on the amount of water consumed. So it is in, the West Branch has been part of the MDC system for a while. We dedicate a lot of funds to, I should say the reservoir, Colebrook Reservoir, dedicate a lot of funds to the preservation and maintenance of that reservoir. It was in the strategic plan, as you pointed out, clearly, but it was on based on different assumptions. I will tell you that even to go back to the actual supply that we have available, without touching the West Branch and the Colebrook Reservoir supply, even the FRWA recognized, and the important thing about the FRWA agreement back from 1998 isn't that they agreed not to object to any sale of water within absent certain triggers. It's the fact that they recognized that there was an abundant supply of water available for use outside our service area, and that at 12.6 million gallons per day, and that they recognized that that was available without any impact whatsoever on the West Branch. They anticipated, we anticipated, that we would increase our customer base. Quite frankly, that hasn't happened to a significant extent either. But there is an opportunity for the NBC to add customers up at UConn, increase its customer base. We're a nonprofit, specially chartered municipal corporation. At the end of the year, our balance sheet is zero. We're not a profit-motivated company. But to the extent that we increase our customer base, we provide for stable rates for our existing customers. We provide the revenues to maintain, for example, the stewardship that we've committed to in the West Branch. We maintain the revenues to keep our facilities at the top level, to keep our water quality as the best, as at least what I consider to be the best water in the state of Connecticut. And so while we want to increase the customer base, it's not a profit motivation. It's because we have costs that need to be paid, those costs escalate, and we want a stable water rate base. Bob, did you want to add something to that? Sure.
Yeah. I'm the one that put the strategic plan in to maintain the West Branch Reservoir as a future water supply. I thought I could answer the question why. The West Branch reservoir was built as a potential water supply in the 1950s. It has been protected as such. MDC owns quite a bit of property around it. The Connecticut DEP has maintained the water quality classification as a Class AA, to protect it from any discharges of sewage into it from Massachusetts as well, and EPA, US EPA supports that. So as I looked at the management of the whole system, the West Branch was critical to protect that for future water supply. Its use now is, as Tim says, is for maintenance of water flow in Farmington. But when we went through the wild scenic study, and I was at the DEP at the time and chaired the water resource subcommittee of that program, we looked at what is the role of the West Branch reservoir in that system. And the role of the West Branch was to maintain the aesthetics, the fisheries, the recreation, and also the water quality in the West Branch of Farmington. In order to preserve that ability, we wanted to make sure that that West Branch reservoir keeps its status as a future water supply, whether it's ever used or not. It may be used 100 years from now, it may be used for Torrington, it may be used for Winstead, it may be used somewhere else, but it needs to be preserved and protected. One, so that the MDC board doesn't sell off the land, we continue to pay taxes on the property out there, and two, that the state continues to maintain a Class AA standard on the water coming into that reservoir. And those are the long-term reasons why we put in that strategic plan that this must be preserved as a future water supply. And that's why I put it in there, that's why I supported it, I was brought this forward that way, so we protect it.
Could you kindly identify yourself?
I'm Bob Moore.
And your role?
I'm retired, but I'm a consultant to MDC. I was worked at DEP with Dick Barlow for 30 years. Was deputy commissioner there, and then left, and then ended up 11 years at MDC.
You would let us stay home.
It's been somewhat of my passion for Farmington River.
Sir.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Hogan. I'm the chairman of the town council in Farmington. I'm speaking as a private citizen tonight. You opened opened my thought process a little bit at the beginning with your introductory comments, so I have a question, and it may be a tangential question. If you choose not to answer it, I'm okay with that as well. So here it goes. You said that the MDC views itself as the trustees of the state's water supply, or something to that effect. I'd say that's commendable. I find it somewhat disingenuous then to find out recently that since we are not, meaning Farmington is not an MDC member town, our ratepayers that you're servicing in Farmington are going to pay a significantly greater and disproportionate rate for water versus your members. So that concerns us, especially if you're adding new member towns as well. If we were to compare what those people are going to pay to our Connecticut water people, it's a significant differential. Your trustee term would not infer the arbitrage that seems inherent in these differentials and therefore concerns us or myself about the proposal.
Well, I would tell you that the rates in Farmington or any of our non-member towns really have very little, if anything, to do with the proposal to bring water to UConn. We're not adding any member towns. We're adding customers potentially to the MDC customer base. Our rates have gone up, clearly. Our rates, our base water rate has gone up modestly, I think 3.5% this budget year. But our other rates, our customer sewer service charge has gone up. Our non-member town surcharge has gone up significantly. We have pressures on us not only with an aging infrastructure and a need to maintain that infrastructure and complete capital improvements to make sure that the potable water gets to where it should go when it needs to go there. But we also have pressures from rating agencies, bond rating agencies that have compelled us to place, because of water consumption's gone down, and the revenue from water consumption has gone down, to place a greater burden to cover our fixed costs on fixed charges, a more foreseeable rate rather than a rate that's contingent upon water usage solely. So those are some of the pressures that we've been under. It's not unique to Farmington. We've had similar concerns expressed in the town of Glastonbury, in the town of East Granby, and some of our other non-member towns to which we supply water. That doesn't take away our obligation to maintain, and doesn't take away, in fact it contributes to our ability to pay the cost to maintain our role as a trustee of these two very important water supply areas. So it's not in any way meant to be disingenuous on my part. Being a trustee of a water supply, even though we own it and control it, we feel we have an obligation that's greater than just supplying water to our member towns. We have an obligation as a water source where there's a water need to address that need. With that comes a price. Again, at the end of the day, or at the end of any given year, you see our budgets, we don't have a profit motivation. We don't answer to shareholders. We are a municipality, nonprofit, and at the end of the year, our balance shows zero, and we start again from the new year. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a lower water bill tomorrow, but it's the justification for why your water bill is higher today. Sir.
My name is Bruce Hunter. I'm a resident of Farmington.
Hello, Bruce.
Nice to see you again, Chris.
Good to see you.
You guys at the MDC do a wonderful job for your member towns, and you're very professional, very polished presentation. I'm very impressed. But I have I have a series of questions, so bear with me. First question is, there are hydroelectric usage, or you've got a couple of stations. Where are those located?
At the Goodwin and Colebrook dams.
All right, do they feed over into Barkhamsted?
No.
All right, so right now there is no connection, there is no existing pipe between the two.
Correct.
Right, and then as a follow-up to that, that you're essentially not releasing in any year, or the releases you've stated have been that the releases from the compensating reservoir have been very low over a series of years. In other words, the spillover from the big dam, the Barkhamsted dam, have been relatively low.
Lake Madonna.
that's compensated.
Right, yes.
Okay, so it's not.
Right.
And the dam, the big Seville Dam, or however way you pronounce it, if it has overflow, then that gets kicked farther down. But from what I understand with your comments is that those overflows are relatively rare. So if you have all this excess water and it's not being used, where's it going?
So,
Down the river, pipe go
Right.
hill.
All right, but if you're not releasing it, is it going away by evaporation?
we could have in Barkhamsted and Nepaug, you could have 10 million gallons a day. You could have 10 million gallons of evaporation in a day. But remember, as we tried to explain in the presentation, East Branch and West Branch are completely different. And the Colebrook Dam has a completely different role than Barkhamsted. We want Barkhamsted and Nepaug to be full. And then Tim's responsibility under the Wild and Scenic is to release water. We're every day releasing 50 CFS, which is 32 million gallons, even when it's not raining for weeks upon end. And so there's a different role for the West Branch than our drinking reservoirs. We don't want to release water. We want to capture that water. So if there is a 100-year drought, we're not in the same circumstance that other water companies would be, where they're having to deal with the drought triggers that DPH initiates starting at 65%. So we never get to that point because of the way in which we manage our drinking reservoir.
And then there's a follow-up, and thank you, but I just
Sure.
wanted to make sure that we were clear. So the excess water that you're looking then about selling it to be able to make money for the member towns and to have it so that you can take care of your, when I'm saying make money for, take care of the infrastructure improvements, and that's why you've gone into hydro, that's why you've gone into waste management, and you know, you do a lot of these things and do it very well. I'm concerned about having, and you did in your frequently asked questions about interbasin transfers. We're talking about something that's out Mansfield, maybe a corner of it's within the 20 miles, but where Stores is, it's an entirely different watershed. And there was something in your frequently asked questions that talked about the cost difference of water over 30 years based on current rates. And you compared, this had to do with the MDC and CWC.
Correct.
And it's really not a fair comparison, because what you have, and this is a question, and I'm kind of making it in terms of a statement, so bear with me. You have the MDC with this water that either it appears to, in Barkhamsted and Nepaug, it either gets used or evaporates, because it's not ending up going downstream. So you either use it or lose it. And I'm just putting something in, may or may not be true, but if it's there and it's able to be sold, whose is it? And you're transferring it over, and you're now taking a cost comparison of a stated, you are a quasi-governmental entity created to help Hartford, and it's immediate because they fouled their own water supply. That's why it was created. So my question is you're making a comparison on a cost basis where your cost for the water is next to nothing because you already have it, versus a private entity which has to they have to give, and you know, you said.
Listen, we're not gonna apologize.
I want to finish my statement, please,
Sure.
if it's okay. With all due respect, you guys did a wonderful presentation. Let me ask a difficult question for you, which is, all right, you have a for-profit entity, CWC, which also provides and took over the Unionville Water Company. They have to pay, dividends, to their investors. So they have certain costs that they have to hit. It's really, my point is, it's really not a fair comparison, because essentially your cost to get that, or the infrastructure cost to get that pipe over there, and then your amortization on it because the water's there.
Right.
You can, and you're precluded from selling it to them because then you're for profit. So I just want to make sure that I think answers the question that our town councilman asked as to what's the differential, and you can sell it, but you have to sell it at a certain rate, and then they charge their profit on top of it. I want to make sure that I understood it.
And all we're trying to do in this presentation and in the EIE is to have a fair comparison. We have a lot of water. Now, whether we, as the presentation mentioned, we have 12 million gallons of water that we can sell without impacting any agreements or DPH margin of safety issues. So we have 12 million gallons of water. Now that water, as we clearly identified, and hopefully it's clear, that water would not ever get into the Farmington River. It comes and it drains into our reservoirs. That water is there, and it's there for drinking water, for drinking purposes. So whether we sell that 12 million gallons to someone in East Hartford, or a 17-mile pipeline to stores in Mansfield, we have that water by right to sell to somebody. And as Chris mentioned, the more water we sell, as we're nonprofit, reduces and maintains water rates for everyone. And
Within your member town area.
within a 20-mile radius of the state capital.
For anybody who purchases water from us,
Right.
including member and non-member.
Thank you.
And I apologize for interrupting, because honestly, I thought you were done. I would just say that, to a great extent, you're correct. We do have that benefit, but what I was about to say was, the foresight that was shown back in 1929 or before that, when they talked about bringing water to Hartford, and there's a book on bringing water to Hartford that has been written, and it's a long read, but it's a good read. There was a lot of forward thinking done back then. They created a water supply that is bountiful. We acknowledge that. And we feel that, at least in part, to the extent that we can do so within the margins of safety established by DPH, if we can make it available to other areas of the state, then I won't say it's necessarily an obligation, but it's at least something that we can throw out there as an option. If we didn't have the supply, and the EIE consultants came to us and asked us to put together a proposal to supply water to UConn, we would have had to respectfully decline. We have the supply. We have the ability to supply that amount of water. We responded because we had that supply, and we felt it was, in good faith, not solely an opportunity to sell water and create a greater customer base, but almost a fiduciary obligation to at least submit a proposal. They may or may not choose us to provide the water necessary for the University of Connecticut. But to merely say we're not interested when we had the supply, I think would have been the wrong thing to do. But yes, Shelley.
Most people I talk to about this understand that the 1.93 gallons for UConn, gallons per day, million gallons per day, is to UConn and to Mansfield is not the problem. The problem is the pipe. And the pipe and the fact that towns along the pipe can also take water out of that pipe. They have a right to utilize that water. But the EIE and the MDC don't seem to be presenting us with any figures on what that amount might be, and that's an unknown amount that could be very large. So to me, when I see the pipe, I see your strategic goal, which isn't stated as keeping the West Branch Reservoir available for drinking water, but to gain control of the West Branch water for drinking water, which is a different spin on the different look at that concept. When I see those two things, I see a lot more water going out of the Barkhamsted Reservoir than you're talking about, and a view in the future to your taking West Branch water much sooner than you would have otherwise. This is like the nose of the camel under the door of the tent. It's not that what you want to do now is the story, but it's a bad story. But what's down the road is the big worry.
And I'm glad you asked that question. Scott and I had a lengthy conversation the other day with Howard Beach, who's the planner in the town of Simsbury. Thank you so much. Of Simsbury, and does some work with the conservation, in the Wetlands and Conservation Commission. who had a meeting the other night that we submitted some materials to him. And in part, we submitted some information about, that addressed that very question that you asked. The MDC is governed by a charter. And there is some language in our charter that talks about the rights of inhabitants along a certain pipeline. They have the right. It says the MDC shall provide. There's some caveats to that. It can't be in competition. We can't be in competition with another water company that's providing water to those people. But the section that both Howard and Scott and I talked about the other day, and that you're referencing today, and you can look it up, it's online, is section 6-3 of our charter. That has to do with our supply system, the system of taking water from the reservoirs to a treatment facility. It's untapped, it's raw water going from the reservoirs to our treatment facilities in Bloomfield and West Hartford. And right in the first sentence of that section, it talks about the MDC exercising its authority under that chapter to create a water supply. There's another section of our charter, which is 5-8, which talks about the right to access our distribution system. Once the water gets to our treatment plant and it's treated, it then goes out to our member towns and in other areas such as South Windsor, Glastonbury, Portland. That constitutes our distribution system. In that area, doesn't say the inhabitants shall have the right. It says the MDC may provide water to those towns, provided they're not in competition. We're not in competition with any other water company who services those towns now, and provided we have an agreement to do so. We are proposing bringing water to UConn sufficient for UConn now and for the foreseeable future, as well as the town of Mansfield. That's the way we size the pipe. We didn't size the pipe to bring excess water so we can provide water to Bolton and Coventry, the two towns along the way. And quite frankly, this is a high pressure line that access to it or spurs coming off of this transmission line would be very difficult, if not engineeringly impossible to access because of the pressure generated. I don't know if you've traveled up 44 recently, over the past 100 years or so, but it's rather hilly. And to get the water from East Hartford to Mansfield, I think there's at least 3 pump stations.
Yes, 3 pump stations.
And it's pushing that water at a very, very high velocity. We've also talked to, in issues that concern us in terms of smart growth initiatives, et cetera, and not just in providing a more water supply than really we've been asked to do. We've been asked to provide what's been set forth in EIE. But providing additional water is just not in our plan. It really flies against the principles of smart growth. To be honest with you, and this is a selfish comment, this is not a position, but it's a position from an East Hartford resident. If UConn or Mansfield Tech Park wanted to relocate, wanted to come to Winchell Field in East Hartford, they're more than welcome. And if they want to bring development to where the water is or where the utilities are, instead of bringing the utilities to where the development is, that'd be fine with me. If they did that, we wouldn't need a diversion permit, and we could provide the water to UConn without permission from DPH because they'd be within one of the MDC's 8-member towns. So we could provide them the 3 million gallons of water that they need, or 1.97 million gallons of water per day that they need, without regulatory approval. And we probably wouldn't be here tonight, quite frankly, if that were the case. That being said, there are other avenues that have been suggested by commissioners of the MDC when this question has been raised. Number one, it's not a right that the inhabitants had under the section of the charter that applies. That's number one. Number two, it's subject to an agreement, and it's got to be, there has to be no other water company that has a franchise interest or agreement to provide water to either any of those communities. And number three, we're only providing as much water in this pipe as is needed by UConn and the town of Mansfield. But commissioners have suggested, for example, with the teachers' retirement bond issue that the state of Connecticut issued a couple years ago, there were restrictive covenants in the bond issue that said that the proceeds of the bonds had to be used to fund the teachers' retirement, which was terribly underfunded. I use that only as an example. That same language, or those same restrictions, can be built into any bonds that are issued to finance the construction of this pipe. so that you cannot access these pipes or use the water flowing through these pipes for any other purpose than that which was originally intended. That would be providing water to UConn and the town of Mansfield. There's ways to address that question, and quite frankly, it is nowhere in UC's plan to provide water to anyone other than UConn and the town of Mansfield.
Let me just add to Chris's comments, and we've made this clear to everyone who has asked. We've made this clear to UConn and to his consultants. Our system that we would bring this water from in East Hartford, where Chris lives, we can only provide hydraulically, we can only provide 5 MGD from that location. So no matter how big the pipe is, we will only provide 5 MGD. And the initial discussions with the EIE consultants was that, you know, the existing demand of UConn was being considered, which was about 2.5 million gallons per day. And then the new future demand of the 1.2 or 1.5 or 1.9 max roughly is that 5 MGD. So as Chris mentioned, if we put a pipeline in 17 miles, that would be reserved for UConn, and only UConn, town of Mansfield. And as Chris mentioned, to simply tap into that main, we wouldn't allow it because we would have an agreement with UConn to sell them X amount of water, and we couldn't just arbitrarily, along the way, give that water to someone else.
I think I just want to emphasize, and I forgot to bring up, thanks Scott. Our system that runs from the treatment plant and then through our distribution system, as he said, hydraulically cannot provide any more than 5 million gallons a day, even if you had a 60-inch pipe, 60-inch diameter pipe. It just cannot do it. It's impossible. So I understand the question, though, and remember, Scott, at length, we had a conversation with Mr. Beach the other day, and it's not an easy answer, it's a complicated answer. I hope I was clear, but please, go to the website, go to the NBC charter, look at those 2 sections. I'll leave my card with you, and if you want to talk about that language, I'd be more than happy to do that with you. Okay? Yes, Mr. Miller.
Just to follow up on that, you could make that one step clearer if MDC took an official position and rather than explain the technical difficulty of having some water come off a high pressure pipe, is to simply commit to saying that we will not provide.
Well, we're only responding to an EIE. You know, we're being considered under the EIE process, and I mean, I understand your point, but we're only responding to a request from the town of Mansfield and UConn.
Sure.
We haven't been requested, we haven't been contacted by Bolton or Coventry or anyone. It is, the EIE does identify that as an issue. It identifies not only, you know, who could be possible customers along each of the routes, whether it was for the MDC's proposal or for the other proposals. There are, in the other proposals, identified other customers within the EIE that they plan to supply water to the town of Tallinn. So we don't propose that, we haven't proposed that, it's not part of our cost estimate. The EIE is analyzing the cost of water and the cost of the construction, which is only to provide water to UConn in town.
But this
You
is,
should clarify that one of those companies already supplies water to town. It's not as if we would be adding that in, it would be any change. They are the current providers to the town of Tallinn.
They do supply water, yes, to the town of Tallinn, that's correct.
this is, you make a good point, Frank. This is a dialogue, and we'll take that under advisement. I think that's a constructive suggestion, and to the extent we can, at the very least, clarify why it's not even possible, both from an engineering and a legal perspective, quite frankly. At the very least, we should do that, and maybe we can take that next step. But that's a good point. We'll certainly consider that.
Just one other follow-up. One of the things that I don't know a whole lot about the hydrology and all the science behind this at all. So, but one of the things that sort of concerned me is the overall process that's being followed. And at least one, what I'll call natural constituency that would speak up and be involved in this. You know, your slideshow spoke about FRWA and I guess the Portland Agreement. So that isn't able to be involved and advocate on behalf of the watershed. Have you considered, in the interest of openness and transparency and nothing to hide, right? Have you considered some sort of limited waiver from that agreement
Well, let me,
to allow them to participate?
Yeah, I can answer that. First of all, they haven't asked for a limited waiver. Start there, number one. Number two, we have met with them at length and have communicated with them since that meeting about their role. And we also have, you know, and I don't want to get into, you know, there was a quid pro quo consideration going back and forth, but we've spent over $500,000 in the past 10 years on groundwater development and exploration. It has not been an insignificant commitment on our part in doing so. We did it because it was our obligation under that agreement, regardless of whether any triggers were met, so that if necessary, we would have at least explored where, if and where the groundwater supplies were available to the NDC and to the NDC customers. So we have and continue to fulfill our obligation under that agreement. It is an agreement. And when I started my comments, I wanted to emphasize that the issue for me on the agreement isn't necessarily that the FRWA cannot object to any diversion permit applications like this for the NDC to supply water. It's that there's a recognition that we have the water to provide. There's a recognition, and this goes back to 1998, under circumstances that were in place back then, when consumption was higher than it is now. And there was a recognition on their part, on the town of Portland's part, and on the part of the NBC, that there was that water available to provide. Those circumstances are only better over the past several years because of consumption than they were back then. We're always willing to talk to you. Listen, FRWA, notwithstanding the fact that they had started out objecting to our diversion program in Portland, I would say that, and Bob, you can probably attest to this, over the course of certainly my involvement at the NBC, Bob's involvement at the NBC, and others, we have had a constructive partnership with FRWA in primarily their environmental stewardship over the west branch of the Farmington River. We've been their partner in that effort. The releases that Tim talks about is part of our partnership with entities like FRWA on the west branch of the Farmington River. So I think that the important part of this discussion when it comes to FRWA is they made a conscious decision, and quite frankly the right one, in 1998. And to their credit, they are willing to abide by their commitment under the agreement today. You know, that's, I know that's a long-winded answer to a very pointed question, but just because they're restricting the agreement from doing public things, we continue to meet with them, we continue to talk to them, and we continue to solicit their input. Because, you know, they're out there every day, Tim's out there every day, we have people out there, but we have someone who goes to the FRWA meetings from the NBC. We participate in the process, and we welcome their input in the process, notwithstanding that 1998 agreement.
I have a comment, or two quick comments and a question. One, even earlier, you said something about even FRWA acknowledges, and you've now talked about their attitude, and they can't speak. You're here representing what they think and what they say. And I will say, I'm Margaret Barter with Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. I was relying on FRWA's expertise to explain this situation. I think they are certainly the best informed and, in fact, more favorable to you than almost any other group out there. And the rest of us are now playing catch-up. And at least for me, if I'm asking dumb questions, it's because you've taken the expert, the lead expert on this watershed out of the dialogue, which I just think is a big mistake. Now, I would also point out, from Rivers Alliance point of view, we feel the west branch of the Farmington is quite well protected, we understand that. We're concerned in your watershed and other watersheds, almost all water companies have excess water now. Water use has subsided. Regional Water Authority laid off a lot of people a few years ago. You're in the same position as a lot of other water companies that are looking for customers. Our feeling is, be sure, if you have low-flow rivers, and you have rivers that could be helped in your watershed, and it doesn't have to be a charismatic river, it can be a little dinky river, we're concerned about it. If there are rivers in your watershed that you can help, we feel you should make that commitment and provide that help before selling water out of the area, particularly with stream flow classifications coming up, where the state is going to at each stream, classifying it, seeing what water is available for it, and we hope that you'll really take good care of the streams within your service area before or in concert with looking for customers outside. And by the way, the service areas are a legal muddle, so.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Outside what you consider.
That's, I'll agree with you on that one, Mark.
Okay, outside
But
what
and
your
maybe
de
that's,
facto service
well,
area.
maybe that's why we really, the NBC supports the commissioning a task force to create a statewide water supply plan and distribution plan that will really address.
We're with you on
We have
that.
700 some odd diversion permits that have been submitted and applied for. 400 of those are active. That's a lot of diversion permits when maybe that number could have been avoided if you had a statewide plan that addressed the issues straight on, head on. So
We really do.
proactively instead of reactively.
We
But
do need that.
just to your
Meantime,
point.
I have to run to FRWA and say, don't oppose anything, but can you answer this question?
Let me just suggest something to you, Mark. Number one, we appreciate your work and your group's work in preserving our rivers, not only the rivers in the West Branch and the contributaries to the West Branch, but I'm sure you're as concerned with the Fenton River up in Mansfield and its integrity and viability. So to that, you should be commended. I didn't mean to, I'm not speaking for or speaking the mind of the FRWA. I'm merely reciting what's contained in the agreement when I say that they made certain decisions back then. If we've offered to meet with you, we've contacted you and schedules have been
And I
such.
responded.
Schedules are such that we couldn't do it. But why don't we do this? Why don't we get together, you, your group, the NBC and FRWA together, and the three of us can sit down, and then we can discuss whatever questions you might have about about this issue.
Excellent.
Okay? Thanks. Sir?
At 32 million gallons minimum, starting in the second week in August, we were losing trout from Collinsville down because the water was too warm and too low. It's not enough water to put in the lower river. I realized that the reservoir was low, but in the spring and in through June, when we had the rain events, you were letting out 300 to 500 on certain weeks, where you could have been pooling some of that water to save for July and August.
And you are addressing it's an issue that needs to be addressed. It's separate, just bear with me a moment. It's separate and distinct from the issue of whether we have sufficient capacity to supply water to UConn from our reservoirs along the east branch of the Farmington. Because those two branches, they don't intermingle. But I would point out to you, and we talked to Bill about this, if there's an opportunity and you want to participate in a renewed dialogue with the three entities that control the flows out of that Cold Lake Reservoir, one of them being the NBC, one of them being DEEP, and the other one being the Army Corps of Engineers, arguably with somewhat different goals in mind and objectives in mind, then we'd be more than happy to participate in that dialogue and try to reach some solution that may not solve all the problems that you experienced last August, but at least maybe a step towards solving some of the problems that you experienced last August. That's a different discussion, but it's one that should be had. And we'd be willing to participate in it.
Part of the well and scenic study was also a management plan which included a spring release for anadromous fisheries. Now, that may have changed at the time, but with our agreement with DEP, there was an anadromous fisheries release for early spring releases. So that there's, when we're looking at the river, we're looking at a spring release for Madras fisheries and then lower after that.
Yes, I'm Pat Supernall. I actually live in Mansfield. A few of us have shown up and trying to be respectful since this is a Farmington meeting. But one of the things, and I'm glad to hear this is a factual meeting, I would like it to somewhat be on the record that this is a loose partnership between the town of Mansfield and the University of Connecticut. It is not Mansfield that is driving this train, it is the University of Connecticut. First of all, the stated demands supposedly Mansfield wants is 435 gallons of water a day. Of that amount, 235,000 gallons of that water is to respond to secondary growth demands from the university's tech park, a 900,000 square foot tech park. 30,000 goes to a private developer, Masonic Care, to build a congregate care facility. And 170,000 would go for 6 parcels at a place called Four Corners, which probably none of you really know unless you went to school there. What we really need in Four Corners are sewers and not really particularly water. The town will readily admit that the majority of its businesses and the majority of its residents receive water through private wells. We do have a water company. We actually have a reservoir in town. Mansfield Hollow is there and Wyndham Water Works is there. So I want to clarify that. I want to make it very clear. We have a very small ad hoc committee called the Four Corner Water and Sewer that has been looking at this. The town of Mansfield and its residents have had absolutely no direct say in whether or not MDC, Wyndham Water Works, or Connecticut Water Works comes to our town and supplies this water. We have grave concerns about the development, grave concerns about what it will mean to bring this pipeline from your end of town. We really don't want more water. Let's make that clear.
Or the expense.
Or the expense associated with it. We don't know what the governance will be. We don't know what the cost will be. There's no offense to MDC or to anybody else in this room. I want that to be understood as a resident of Mansfield. My question too, since this is a factual finding, you had provided or supplied early on, I think it was December 18th, a PDF in which you said quite clearly, UConn asked the MDC to consider providing water. You have since corrected that, and now that fact reads, the MDC was asked to consider providing water directly to UConn. I would like it on the record to be noted that when you click to the link, since I noted that there was a www.mdc, that instead of getting the original document, you get the revised document, but they don't tell you that's the revised document. There is, however, a link to the January one. So that my question is this: who asked you? What entity approached you?
Malone and McBroom.
Okay, and why would Malone and McBroom approach you when they already had 2 other suppliers in mind?
I don't know, you'll have to ask that.
Who would I
Actually, I
ask?
don't know. Ask Malone and McBroom. There wasn't a, well, it's a mistake that was corrected. It was Malone and McBroom.
Who from Malone and McBroom?
They didn't ask me, they asked the NBC.
Yeah, I would say that
early summer
the
2012.
scoping notice that was issued, I don't know if it was June, which Malone McBroom was doing, included analyzing water from the MDC. So that is...
I don't think someone approached us, I think they just included a scoping notice.
One more comment that I would like to make on behalf of Mansfield and also to give this information to the town. I don't speak as an official of the town per se, just as a taxpayer, but I would like it known that, and I think Mr. Callahan is sitting in the room, that he can stand up and verify this since he told us this a couple of weeks ago in the town meeting, that the $170 million that the governor allocated for the tech park, which is only for 1 building, does not need water. It does not need this additional water because of their reclamation facility. So the question then looms out there for all of us in the state: what's the rush? Why are we doing this? What's going on here? Because they have sufficient water based upon what he told us. What's that? To construct and maintain that 1 building. They have no more funding for the other 775,000 square feet of building space that they would like for that campus.
Well,
So I just wanted to leave that out here, not so much for you, but for the public to know. It's very important because we are being represented as being partners in this, and that we want this water. I don't think that is necessarily a true characterization.
If my references to UConn, bringing water to UConn at the town of Mansfield in any way implied that there was a partnership amongst all of Mansfield and the University of Connecticut, I apologize. That's not what I meant to imply. In fact, I've met with people in Mansfield who have indicated that it really doesn't matter to them where the water might come from. It's whether the water comes there, and if or when it does, who governs or who controls the distribution of that water. So I know and we know that there is a whole different set of issues and a whole different situation going on within Mansfield, between the university and the town of Mansfield, and any one of a number of players and positions on whether to bring water there, whether to bring more water there, and once it's there, not necessarily from whom, but once it's there, if it's there, who's going to control its distribution at that point. So I understand that, we understand that, we don't have a dog in that hunt, but I do appreciate you bringing that up, truly. Bill?
I was under the impression that at some point you had said, the MDC had said that they would be in a position to supply water if the Fenton well fields were shut down. What kind of production is currently coming out of the Fenton well fields that you could conceivably replace?
Hold on.
No, I don't want to speak to that, but certainly Mr. Kellerman, if he's still in the room, could probably answer the question.
Well, let's see if we
I believe that the existing demand for the university is about 2.5 million gallons a day, I believe.
But do you know how much of that is from, is that your question, Bill? How much of
Well,
that is?
how much of that comes from Fenton and how much
Well,
comes
there's
from...
4 well fields.
Tom,
Let me see if I can straighten this out. The university's average daily demand is about 1.3 million gallons a day. We peak at about 1.9 on our peak day. There are 2 separate well fields, one on the Willimantic, one on the Fenton. We manage our Fenton well field to match stream flow. When the stream flow hits 3 cubic feet per second in that stream, we shut the well field down. That well field is registered diversion is at 840,000 gallons a day.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
One of the things that hasn't been talked about that's a changing factor is climate change. I hope that's not controversial to the MDC, that our climate is getting warmer. It could be that this year, being extraordinary low flows, extraordinarily warm water toward the end of the summer being released may not be unusual in years to come, and maybe your existing margins of safety and benchmark figures need to be revised in order to...
You just hit on yet another reason to have a statewide water supply distribution plan, because if it affects us, it affects everybody.
With your mindfulness for the need for statewide water plan and better water planning and allocation, and mindful of the 2003 study that was endorsed by the legislature but never enacted on because of some of the problems with the exclusion for diversion permitting in the 1982 or 84 regulation with, 1,800 companies that were grandfathered in. So with a mindfulness to that not having been addressed, with a mindfulness to climate change issues and questions of whether we will need more water in reservoirs to protect the aquatic life as temperature rises, and with a mindfulness to your own statement that 2012 was a hotter year and that there was more impact on water reserves because of that. And mindful of Pat's comments that UConn can currently supply its water needs and can also accommodate the construction of the new tech park. What is the rush for supplying water now?
Both that statement, which turned into a question, you raised a lot of issues that are all part of the overall EAE. I would just suggest to you that I can't answer what the rush might be. I can only say that we responded to a request to submit a proposal. Both of you have raised questions that are probably more appropriate next Tuesday night, when you have an opportunity to speak. You had, you spoke at, I think, did you speak at the Nancy one?
She was not in attendance.
Okay.
I was there, but I
You were
did
there,
not
you
speak.
speak, okay. But there's another opportunity next Tuesday that you can speak to that issue. reacting to a request to submit an action.
I would like to address the point that you made this evening, which is in trying to interest your current users of MDC water in the sale of water to UConn or to Mansfield. You indicated that this would be effective in helping to stabilize their current rates. However, you failed to mention that the purchase of that water, which would be at your most expensive rate because it would be a non-member town subject to fees and also to absorbing capital costs, is that the tab for that would in fact be paid largely by the state, because UConn's water bill will be paid by the state of Connecticut, and in a sort of de facto way, much of Mansfield's water bill will be paid by the state of Connecticut, because we are so heavily dependent upon pilot funds, which is state money. So while you may be saving your users money out of one pocket, it will definitely be coming out of the other.
Chris, let me just say both proposals, whoever provides water to the state is paying for that water. So whether it's the MDC or another proposal, the state's paying for that water.
Right, but I put it in the context of you tried to interest your users that this would help stabilize their rates. And my point is simply, yes, it may stabilize their rates, but they'll pay for it.
But it'll stay,
And again,
point well
water
taken,
will be
it'll
sold at the
stabilize
highest margin.
everyone's rates. Everyone buys water from Metropolitan District.
Which is another reason to question the supplying more water at this time, given when the state's kitty. So I have a last question, which is that you
I'm
mentioned.
very patient young lady. Thank you.
Well, within addressing the question of whether or not it's someone who is along the delivery line of the water has the right to access that water, and you're saying no, that you would, based on that you would not allow that. Is there a legal precedent? Has there been a user who has been denied water because of a zoning overlay or for any other reason that is along a water main that is asked for water and has been denied it, and that has been upheld, or?
I'm not aware of one, but.
Right, so that remains a question.
Certainly not along our distribution line.
Right, so it hasn't been exercised before. You really can't
There
address the
hasn't been a
question.
request because the charter was enacted in 1929. Since that time, we have exclusive service areas that have been adopted by the legislature. We have a WOC, I forget what that stands for, I apologize. Coordinated, thank you, Margaret. That has come into play. So the provisions of our charter, in many respects, have been supplanted by or replaced by regulatory provisions that set out. I would suggest not in a necessarily a terribly coordinated fashion, but set out different exclusive service areas for various companies. Aquarian, South Central, Bridgeport Hydraulic, which is now Aquarian, Connecticut Water Company, and others that have almost made that provision, quite frankly, of our charter of not much effect, to be honest with you. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I think if we had been discussing this in 1998, this would be a no-brainer. We'd all say this is great, progress, da-da. I think the timing for UConn and storage was really unfortunate on this particular proposal. And obviously, they want and need this to happen for their own very particular needs and desires. This is not a good idea now. This whole concept should just wait a few years. We're on the cusp of probably very dramatic climate changes. We don't know what they're going to be. Why should we lock ourselves into something that will be there forever when we can just pull back and let someone else do it, or let the whole thing wait? There.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If I understood correctly, you've had a decline in consumption of about 10 million gallons. What do water utilities know about the elasticity of that? How much of that might come back with a recovering economy? How much of it might come back when there's more need for water? We hear that manufacturing is coming back to the region. How much of that 10 million might you?
Well, that's why we project out our margin of safety over an extended 50-year period of time. So we're comfortable to say that even if we were to provide UConn and Mansfield with 3 million gallons a day, that there'll be even anticipated future development, or that elasticity you're talking about coming back, that we'd have plenty of water to provide our customers, expanded as they might be with this recovery, or hopefully a recovery soon, in fact. But I'll tell you that, keep in mind that the 12.6 million gallons a day that we have available, that number's determined after reducing our available water supply by water commitments. That includes water that we either sell to other entities or reserve but don't sell to other entities. So those are commitments, almost like options. We take that out of the equation. It also is after we take into account the safe yield requirements from the Department of Public Health. So there's that already a built-in cushion based upon the safe yield requirements of DPH. It's at that point that we then get to this 12.6 million gallons a day. And it's only less than a quarter of that we're looking to, as an option, to bring to UConn. So that's a lot of water in excess of the 3 million gallons per day that we're talking about here that would otherwise be available. If it comes to that expansion, if it comes to, on the good side, or the climate change and drought conditions on the negative side, the whole state is going to have to react to that. And quite frankly, one of the reasons why you have 700 some odd diversion permits applied for, 400 diversion permits in effect, is because there's a recognition, even by our regulators, that there are some areas of the state with a plentiful amount of water, and some areas of the state without. And it's through those diversion permits and Margaret's familiar with those, that the water resource is shared throughout the state by everyone in the state.
As I read your testimony about the impact on MDC of the stream flow regulations as they were initially proposed,
Yeah.
You seem to say that if they had been adopted as suggested, you would have had to tap the West Branch pretty much right away.
That's right.
That sounds like a...
Well, because on top of the stream flow regulations and the requirements of stream flow to us, we also had to meet our obligation in the Wild and Scenic, in our Wild and Scenic Farmington River Management Plan, in addition to, not in lieu of, but in addition to the requirements of stream flow. We already managed with help and with partners, the West Branch of the Farmington River beyond the requirements of the then promulgated stream flow regulations, but they were dealing it in the aggregate. There was a cumulative effect on the MDC. So that statement was true then, it remains true now. Fortunately, through the work of people like Bob Moore and Scott and Sue, we were able to effect an exemption because the state recognized that our management, with others, I'm not suggesting that we're the only players in this game, but our management with others of the West Branch of the Farmington River exceeded those that would otherwise be required in the stream flow, and because we are partners in that management, the West Branch was exempt.
But
So,
if last summer was a serious problem, even while you met your requirement, doesn't that suggest that the requirement might be low and would be somebody might be thinking about revising that so that the requirement, in fact, is sufficient to support the fishery?
The issue with the flows wasn't, it was because of agreements about the regulation and governance of the Colebrook Reservoir and who has say and how much is released, i.e. MDC, Army Corps of Engineers, and DEEP. That's where the answer to that problem has to be addressed in that tri-party agreement or that arrangement. And again, as I told Bill and as I told the gentleman here, and I'll tell you, to the extent our partners on the management of that reservoir want to get together and try to find some other ways and be perhaps a little more flexible on releases, given certain conditions that might arise, similar to last August of 2012, we'll be at the table.
Chris, I'd like to just address the elasticity issue. If you can ask yourself, the one reason why we, the MDC and any other water company across the country is seeing decline in water is, as Chris mentioned. But in addition, we have rules and regulations that are requiring conservation measures. And everyone knows that your toilets flush with a half a gallon. They used to flush with 2 gallons, 3 gallons. Front loading washing machines use 9 gallons per load versus 40 gallons per load. So all of those things, ask yourself, do you ever think that the regulation is going to allow these devices to go backwards? No, it's not going to happen. So there is a decline of consumption, and frankly, we see see declining consumption because, you know, our member towns are paying for our sewer surcharge, and people, we have an expansion that we have to deal with our sewer system. So the cost and the consumption of water is going down across the country, and you can't even buy a shower head today at Home Depot that doesn't meet a certain regulation in terms of flow. And we're not going to go backwards as a country.
We're going to come close to wrapping up, but someone who hasn't been quite interested, yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amy Suffredini, I'm also on the town council, but just a question.
I'm sorry I didn't introduce you earlier.
Oh, not a problem.
And to the other council.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to explain everything. I'm thinking a little bit more in the future. What you sort of said and what I'm hearing on basic level is we have excessive water right now and we can use it, we want to use it. You've also said there's a lot of costs and we're trying to manage this all well. What happens next year or the year after when someone else comes to you and says we need water and you guys have the ability? At what point, now you said maybe a quarter of that excessive water you potentially could give to UConn. At what point do you stop? I understand that regulations and people are using less water, but how many times do you let people in and give the water, or give the water to some extent, not away, but pay for it?
DPH?
Well, DPH has the safety or the margin of safety requirement, but I want to point out, that's to bring up something that Sue brought up earlier. If we were to go by the DPH standard for how much water you have available to sell, and everyone, by the way, every other water company is in the same boat. They all have this, and they're looking at it, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but with a profit motive as opposed to a public interest motive, or in conjunction with, let's put it that way, a public interest motive. But if we were to use the standard that's applied to all those water companies in determining how much they have available, that 12.6 goes up to about 18 million gallons a day. We don't. And we don't in part because of the issue about making sure that we have enough water to provide our customer base now and into the future, 50 years into the future. So we use a different standard. There was a drought in 1965-66 that has been rated as that type of drought that would only be experienced once every 150 years. The standard for the DPH in determining your safe yield, your margin of safety, is that drought which would occur once every 100 years, a more frequent event, therefore a less severe event. We use the more severe criteria to get to the 12.6 because of, in part, issues just like that. We have never gone below the 85% level in terms of our reservoir capacity. And I don't anticipate us going, I'm not a soothsayer, but I don't anticipate us going below 85% anytime soon. In fact, we maintain 95 to 100% levels a majority of the time throughout the year. So I'm not suggesting we have all the answers on water supply and water preservation, but so far, where we've had to answer questions or respond to issues related to our water supply, we've been very conservative in our approach. And it's to maintain that level of service, that quantity of potable, quality drinking water necessary to address the elasticity issues that you refer to, the drought issues that you refer to, and the issue that you refer to about what might happen tomorrow in terms of development. So I can't predict what's going to happen.
But that 12.6, that's excess that you're comfortable with potentially supplying to other people?
I would tell you right now that tomorrow, if the
All right, I'm
MDC
just trying to...
No, but if the MDC had a customer says, look, I could use 12.5, then we're necessarily going to do that, to be honest with you. But it is available for us to sell. And it is available to us to sell that where even if we were to sell that amount, there's still the safe yield buffer at a more stringent criteria that we have available to us in the event of situations that are unforeseen, catastrophic droughts, climate change, whatever it might be. So I'm comfortable in telling you that with that conservative approach, we'll meet our water supply needs for 50 years and beyond, regardless of development issues. So. All right, listen. Okay.
Could you just give us a quick description of what the procedure is from here? I mean, who decides what and what criteria they use to...
Yeah, well, there's going to be that meeting next Tuesday, the second, I think it's the second public hearing of the EA. next Tuesday. There's a comment period that runs through January 31st, 2013. Once the comment period is closed out, and you're obviously all welcome to comment, so any resident of the state can comment. I believe then they will go in the room and analyze the comments. They may respond. There'll be public response to either some comments or some questions that are raised by those who submit prior to January 31st. And then they'll make a recommendation as to the best alternative. I don't know the time frame, how long that'll take. And ultimately, I believe, Tom, it's a decision of, is it OPM that would ultimately decide, the Office of Policy and Management, that would make the decision on which avenue to take. And Tom, you may be able to help out in terms of time frame, what they're anticipating. I hate to put you on the spot.
No, I came to the meeting tonight to learn about the MDC's proposal as well. I did not come here to speak, but the record for comments will close on the 31st of January. As you would expect, this is a well-commented upon environmental impact evaluation. So we have comments not only from the state regulators involved, but from municipal officials, both on the west side and in northeastern Connecticut and other locations, river advocates, watershed advocates, individual interested parties and citizens. So it will take probably somewhere in the vicinity of 60 to 90 days to kind of do a thorough review and comment on those comments that come in. We then prepare a document for the university's board of trustees. Essentially, kind of here's the analysis, here's what the comments were, here the responses to the comments. It's then sent to the Office of Policy and Management for formal decision. And I will not predict tonight how long that whole process would take. It's our expectation and hope that it will be done late spring, early summer, but these things have sometimes taken a lot too long.
A process thing, I think CEQ was asking the same question. Up till now, I haven't checked today, UConn has not been posting the comments as they come in, and that means that if people want to see comments or participate in it, we're trying to post them as best as we can, but instead of being able to post links to UConn, we have to put up whole long documents. So I'm wondering if UConn would consider putting up the comments at this point, so that people can read them, not on our website where our webmaster has the flu.
Well, I think that, I'm sure Tom will leave you his card, you can have that. I'm not going to put Tom on the spot tonight, but.
I will.
Well,
What a surprise, Margaret.
I tried, Tom, but but anyway, thank you all for coming. This has been informative for us, certainly. I hope it's been informative to you. We came here tonight not necessarily thinking that we were going to change anyone's mind about the position. Perhaps we have, perhaps we haven't, but our real goal here was to share information and to get some of the facts out as we know them. So thank you all for coming. Have a great evening.